The Rundown with Carrie Saldo podcast is funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield, offering assisted living and Compass memory support with evidence-based treatment for those with memory loss. More at armbrookvillage.com.
This is The Rundown, your weekly news and review from Western Mass. I'm Carrie Saldo. It's Friday, February 21st. The days are getting noticeably longer and brighter, lifting my spirits. Are there tidbits in the week's news lifting the spirits of our rundowners? Well, let's find out. Joining us this week, Paul Tudhill, reporter emeritus, Berkshire Eagle reporter Sten Spinella, and Adam Frenier of NEPM's newsroom. Good morning to all three of you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We are going to hear about what protesters had to say on Monday's President's Day holiday, sharing their perspective on Donald Trump's first month or so in office. A new arts center proposed for the Mass College of Liberal Arts in North Adams, just prompting questions about the true cost of a gift and whether the transparency that Massachusetts voters called for is being delivered. And as always, if you have thoughts, you can email us, therundown@nepm.org. First, though, the big story of the week. Thank you, Adam Frenier, for laughing. Yes, that's right. Ice, baby, and chipping it all away. I think ice skates were probably the most efficient means of travel this week across much of the 413. Ice-encased roads and sidewalks and the negative impact that that's had on our ability to get just about anywhere, whether that's personally or have your deliveries sent to your house. Here's how Stephanie Barry reported the situation in the Springfield Republican newspaper. The sound of ice chopping resonated throughout city neighborhoods on Monday. Chop, 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 as residents tried to free their cars from ice or clear walkways on President's Day. An onerous combination of snow, sleet, rain, and a deep freeze made for difficult conditions on roads across the region, particularly narrow side streets, when parked cars, despite citywide bans, hampered plowing. We're also seeing a shortage of independent plow drivers here causing this problem. Springfield has talked about this problem for years. The city has grappled with the issue, and there's many other communities, which we saw in local reporting, who are challenged by a similar shortage. And then it kind of hit me, are we seeing fewer and fewer plow drivers because we're just not seeing the strong winter weather we once did? It's not worth it to hold on to this expensive equipment for maybe one or two plows a year. What do you think?
I certainly think that's a valid point, and you're right. I mean, after every significant winter storm, there are always complaints about the performance of the municipal DPWs, and could they do a better job? I suppose so, but it would come at a cost. They would have to purchase or lease more heavy equipment. They would have to hire more workers, more municipal employees, and that would come at a cost.
And a lot of that's why I think we've seen cities and towns shifting to more and more of these. They do have municipal employees in charge of some plowing aspects, but much of the side street work in particular is done by independent contractors. The city of Springfield willing to pay $140 an hour for these plow drivers. Adam, I mean, that seems like a pretty strong incentive. What else could they be doing?
Well, it's a good question, Carrie. And I think another part of this is a lot of these Department of Public Works or highway departments, they have vacancies on their own staffs. They're not all fully staffed, and it's difficult to get a commercial driver's license to do this. And you mentioned $140 an hour. Springfield, before the storm had hit, had already gone over its snow and ice removal budget of $1.6 million. They can deficit spend. That's one of the few things in Massachusetts that communities are allowed to go into the hole on, so to speak. And I think for communities here, and particularly in the Berkshires, where whether it snows an inch or a foot, they still have to send the trucks out.
Yeah.
It's going to be a very expensive winter, even though we haven't had that big whopper of a storm.
No. Yep. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, I was going to say another factor in this storm too was the shortage of ice melt and sand that forced some DPWs, Chicopee, for example, to have to drive to Albany, New York, to pick up a supply. I'm not sure what the reason for that was. Did they purchase less this time around, thinking, well, we haven't used a lot of it for many years because we haven't had rough winter weather, or were there some other issues in the supply chain?
I mean, we certainly saw for individuals, we went to Home Depot, we went to Lowe's, we went to Ocean State job lots just for our own driveway looking for some more ice melt, and you're hard pressed to find it if you didn't stock up on it before the storm. And then our own DPW in Palmer, where you can fill buckets of sand ahead of the storm, we did, and then midway through the week it was empty like we saw in Chicopee. Sten, what were some of the impacts you saw out there in the Berkshires?
Yeah, I mean, every issue you all raised cropped up in Berkshire County, which was, of course, hit hard by the storm. I mean, I still have ice in my car. A wide swath of Sandusfield and Otis residents lost power. The oppressive winds clocked in at 63 miles per hour in North Adams and 49 in Williamstown. There were downed trees all over the place. Roads were, either slick or impassable. And like you said, salt is low across the county. I know, particularly in North County, and the weather raised questions here about parking bans and plowing practices. But, I'll say this was an incredible confluence of factors to lead to just this perfect storm for bad roads.
I loved how your colleague Heather Bello wrote about it. The ice storm had its frozen claw around the Berkshires, and I would submit all of Western Massachusetts for that matter. I mean, we certainly saw in Franklin County, multiple communities opened up warming centers for residents. Hawley declared a state of emergency. And in Hampshire County, Alexander McDougall wrote this for the Daily Hampshire Gazette. Quote, harsh weather conditions of significant snow combined with freezing rain, a lack of adequate salt supply, and a shortage of available workers. And that's left residents up and down the Pioneer Valley in slippery conditions. And here we are on Friday, and it's still looking like that.
50 degrees on Tuesday, though.
I can't
hang in there.
I can't
hang
wait
in there, everybody.
Can't wait to get the golf clubs out maybe in about 6 weeks, Paul. But I think one other thing, Carrie, to think about long-term impacts. This is an election year in many communities, and mayors and city councilors are up for re-election. And sometimes it's the bread and butter issues that get politicians in trouble in local communities. Is my street cleaned? Are the potholes filled? Did my trash get picked up? Did my taxes go up? And voters have long memories about some of this. And while this is maybe well out of the control of a lot of local officials, it's still on them to come up with a solution. And that may be something that does have repercussions.
Yeah, look at and this is kind of off this topic, but sort of related. Look at the political reaction to the spike in gas and electric bills this winter.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, and that all is tying into the weather, right? Like you want to stay warm in your house.
It's the coldest, according to the figures I saw yesterday, we're on track for the coldest winter since 2017, 2018. So again, we haven't seen these conditions in quite some time.
And then with the wind chill on top of that, it's just, it's brutally cold. And I've been thinking about the impact on the unhoused population and the importance of having warming centers available for people who don't have the ability to come inside and get warm, and just how that's very important for the safety of the people living in our communities. Adam, when you mentioned golf clubs, I thought you were going to get them out to chip the ice. I was like,
It'd probably be more useful that way than me actually taking them to the course.
Well, it's certainly something, and I think your point, Adam, is spot on about the impact that this could have on potentially some of these election cycles, because this is the thing that I think sticks in the craw of voters, especially when it's just so miserable like it has been this week. I do have to shout out delivery drivers everywhere, whether you're a postal worker or working for another delivery service. It's just rough conditions out there, and I think people have been doing what they can to make the conditions better, whether that's helping yourself, helping your neighbors. Our UPS guy took pity on us this week and walked up our driveway. It was really kind of him to go ahead and do that. All right, President's Day was Monday, and we saw protesters at Springfield City Hall, among other places. On Monday, protesters in Springfield, Boston, and elsewhere, as I said, took to the icy streets and bundled up to brace against the below freezing temperatures and a wind chill that made it feel much colder, as we were talking about. Jim Kinney of the Springfield Republican had this to say. He reported that protesters were there to decry not only the administration of Donald Trump, but the role Elon Musk, Tesla's CEO, is taking in massive federal layoffs, policy decisions like closing USAID, putting holds on the environmental and research funding and the direction taken by the second Trump administration. Were any of you surprised to see the President's Day holiday protesters head out that day? Adam, Paul, Sten?
What struck me actually when I was thinking about this was how few and far between these protests have been compared to what we saw when Trump was first in office in 2017. I mean, now obviously a lot's changed. His election in 2016 was a stunning upset, and I think it did genuinely anger people. And then he. In 2017, he replaced a very popular president in Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. He immediately went after Obama's signature legislative accomplishment, which was the Affordable Care Act, and I think that galvanized a lot of opposition. This time around, President Biden was very, very unpopular when he left office. Trump came in and has obviously executed a plan that they worked on during the transition, this flood the zone, shock and awe, however you want to describe it, of the executive orders that he's issued, I think has caught a lot of his opposition off guard. Plus the formal opposition, if you will, the Democratic Party remains divided. They can't agree over why they lost the last election. They don't seem to have any strategy for moving forward, and they're essentially leadership-less at this point.
Ezra Klein in the New York Times, he's an opinion columnist. He brought up this NPC issue, which various pro-Trump groups have sort of taken to labeling some liberal activists NPCs derived from the non-player characters in video games. And essentially, these are the background players who don't think for themselves. They don't really have any autonomy. But Ezra Klein, made this assertion this week that he played the little play on words with the acronym, and he's calling some Republicans elected to leadership in Washington non-player Congress. Now, locally, we saw Senator Jake Oliveira in Ludlow say that Republican majorities in Washington are not providing oversight. Quote, "We wouldn't stand for that in Massachusetts, no matter who the executive is," he said. But Trump won the day, and voters sent him to Washington. To Paul's point, there's a lot of chaos in the Democratic Party, a lot of finger pointing. Adam, what are your thoughts on this whole Republicans aren't taking ownership and not providing the oversight that they should be?
Well, I think it's early to say. I mean, it's been just about a month since President Trump was sworn into office. But to your point about a Democratic Party that's divided, I think the first step for the Democrats to try to get themselves back in the ballgame, so to speak, is how do we take back Congress? And, that's the year and change away, but it won't be that long again before the election cycle begins. And they really need to figure out how to do that, if they want to try to slow down the president and some of his priorities. How do they get together and how do they push and try to take back some of the seats that they've lost? And I think, we were talking, Paul mentioned the lack of protest. That may be a sign of some hopelessness by some people who are like, the Congress went to the Republicans, the president's a Republican, they're doing what they want, and there's not a lot I can do to stop it. But there are still going to be a lot of people that fight very hard to try to stop it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point.
Go ahead, Stan.
I just wanted to jump in because you've all raised a lot of good points. One thing in particular, Carrie, what you said about Republicans not providing oversight. Rep. Richard Deal had a telephone town hall last week and spoke about, calling on Republicans to check the president, which to me, sounded a little unrealistic. We haven't really seen that on the whole. But he also spoke at length about that Elon Musk problem. And, I'm not surprised by these protests because a lot of the people who called in expressed concern specifically that an unelected person has such power. And we're already seeing the effects of these edicts locally, from Berkshire County Head Start and organizations like that.
Paul, was there anything you wanted to add?
Well, I was just going to say is, Adam's right. We are early on here. Trump's been in office for a month. It seems longer, but he's been in office for a month. And the Congress is going to exercise its constitutional authority eventually here when it comes to raising revenue and appropriations. And I think that's when you're going to see a Democratic strategy emerge. Remember, in the House, it's a 3-seat majority now for the Republicans,
It's
or something like that, because of the departures of people that have gone off to join Trump's cabinet. So, let's wait and see how this all plays out in the next few months.
And to your point about waiting to see how it plays out, I think I was really struck by some of the signs that were held outside of Springfield City Hall, one in particular that said "Stop the Coup." And that was my thinking. It was like, I understand everyone's feeling, or many people are feeling impassioned, emboldened, frustrated, maybe angry and scared. But the word coup really hit me as something that maybe at this point is maybe a bridge too far. Like, let's hold off. Let's assess the situation and see what happens before we maybe make a rush to judgment like that. Was just kind of my thinking on that particular sign.
Maybe a case of just trying to grab some attention too, but there are people that feel like that, this is where we're headed with somebody who isn't elected, calling a lot of the shots out of the White House.
Yeah, I think maybe that was directed at Elon Musk, but I also think that there isn't any indication that Musk has gone rogue and is doing something that Trump doesn't want him to do. Remember, Musk moved into Mar-a-Lago after the election and spent months there. This all had to be planned out. This isn't happening by accident. There's a plan here, and they're executing it.
You know this much, though, Paul. If Musk does anything to cross Trump, that'll be the end of Elon Musk's situation in Washington. We've seen that in the past.
Yeah, and he's on and Musk is on shaky ground with some of the Trump supporters. Or as Steve Bannon the other day referred to him as a parasitic illegal alien.
Wow. Well, it's certainly an ongoing issue and to be continued. We are going to take a quick break. When we come back, our rundowners on the questions swirling about a proposed gift of a multi-million-dollar art center in North Adams, and Massachusetts voters supported an audit of the legislature. But are they going to get it? Stay here. The Rundown, back in 90 seconds. Welcome back to The Rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. I'm Carrie Saldo, joined by journalist past and present Paul Tudhill, Adam Frenier, and Sten Spinella. Sten, I'm going to come out to you. We're going to talk about a story which really has me wondering if it's okay to look a gift horse in the mouth. Here's a little bit of context. Last month, Sten Spinella for the Berkshire Eagle reported, quote, a planned new arts center at MCLA opens up chances for partnerships with local institutions and a creative curriculum. But some are asking, why is a California artist with no prior connection to the college paying for it? The Campagna Clearfield Art Center for Creativity in the Arts, quote, will serve as an essential part of the MCLA learning experience, according to a news release from the college. It will be named after and feature the work of its largest donor, California-based artist and writer Carolyn Mary Clearfield. Sten, to that question you posed, why is a California artist with no connection to the 413 or MCLA willing to pay for this?
Yes, so I loved how you put it as the true cost of a gift leading in. I mean, this groundbreaking on this multi-million-dollar art center is supposed to happen this fall. For the construction in the first few years in operation, the college won't be spending money. That's because the donor, Carolyn Mary Clearfield, has gifted the college roughly $8 to $10 million for the effort. So that's not strange in itself. What is unusual is that Clearfield has come to some kind of agreement with the college, requiring her work to be on display on a rotating basis and for it to be used in ways not yet specified as a part of the curriculum across a variety of subjects. So, like you said, Clearfield is based in California. She's a writer and an artist without a discernible connection to MCLA. She donated $10 million to California State University Long Beach in 2019 to expand and renovate its museum. And the price for the college was including Clearfield's work in the museum's permanent collection. So an LA Times art critic called the arrangement a train wreck in 2022 and said it was a serious disservice to students. He wrote that despite a university press release praising Kleefeld's artistic career, she is a, quote, visual artist of no distinction in the field. So while MCLA President James Burge says this is already a done deal, one Board of Trustees member, State Rep John Barrett, is pushing for the plan to be subject to Board of Trustees approval. And he hasn't yet heard back from the college on whether that approval is necessary.
And you reported this week that State Rep Barrett, he's not for or against the proposal per se, but he has a lot of questions that he wants to understand in terms of the impact that the cost benefit analysis, essentially, pros and cons of something like this. What are some of the things that he wants to better understand?
Well, for one, like the details of the deal with Kleefeld are a little unclear, and it just hasn't, the plan hasn't really been fleshed out. It's still somewhat vague in general, but I will say, like, big picture, this is a very interesting conversation to have in the Berkshires because, the county runs on a creative economy, and something like this center would help MCLA immensely. But other cultural institutions I've spoken with in the area are hesitant to critique any parts of the deal because, these museums and colleges and institutions all work together and work off of each other. So the last thing I'll say
and in MCLA, large part with donor funds.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And, it's not like Burge isn't aware of, what happened in California. The college has acknowledged that they do not want to replicate what happened at Cal State University Long Beach, where Kleefeld's deal was criticized by the LA Times and by students at the school.
I was surprised when I was doing research for this that MCLA currently has fewer than 1,000 undergraduate and graduate students. And I'm thinking about, does that warrant an $8 to $10 million building? Or I should say that's the gift. We don't know how much the building will cost because they haven't released plans yet. Paul, Adam, thoughts?
Well, I think, first of all, Carrie, there's probably some hope that this might attract some students back to MCLA.
If you build it, they will come?
It's kind of that idea. And, they're not alone with colleges dealing with dropping enrollment. I think there's two things I find interesting about this. At some point, the college is going to be responsible for maintaining and operating the building. That's going to cost money. That's going to have to come out of their budget, and I'm sure the board has something to say about that. Secondly, just like you, Carrie, having spent some time in the Berkshires, I've gotten to know John Barrett a little bit. When something is of mind to him, he doesn't let it go, and he's going to keep pounding away at it until he gets the answers he wants. And I think President Burge here would be wise not to give advice, but, maybe they do need to have a board discussion because, having somebody like John Barrett, who's done a lot for the Berkshires on the board, he's not going to give up on this, and he's going to keep pounding the table until he finds out what he wants to find out.
Paul Tuthill?
I agree. I mean, I think there should be an examination of what strings are attached to this generous offer of funding that's coming in. I mean, it looks like this artist is paying for a permanent venue to put her works on display, which, as Adam pointed out, the college is eventually going to have to cover the costs of maintaining.
Yeah. Well, certainly more that you will be following out there in the Berkshires. More to come, I'm sure. Sten Spinella. I'm going to move us on.
Definitely.
Voters demanded transparency at the last election with regard to an audit of the legislature, but has that been delivered? I think is something we're going to talk about here in the next few minutes. NEPM's Carrie Healy interviewed State House News Service's Colin Young for her Beacon Hill and 5 podcast. You can check that out at nepm.org. But last fall, we saw more than 70% of Massachusetts voters gave the state auditor the power to dig into some work of the legislature. Now we have news that the Massachusetts Fiscal Alliance says that the State House has retained a law firm to help them fight Auditor Diana DiZoglio's effort to audit said legislature. Massachusetts voters supported this audit. Now taxpayers could potentially be paying for a legal battle against said audit. What's going on here, guys?
This isn't surprising. I think this is what everyone predicted. Question 1 would pass overwhelmingly because there was no opposition to it, no formal opposition to it, and then the legislature would drag its feet and litigate. It's a playbook that the Massachusetts legislature followed about I want to say maybe 15, maybe it was even 20 years ago, when voters approved a public campaign finance law, which the legislature refused to fund. There was litigation. It eventually went all the way to the state Supreme Judicial Court. The state Supreme Judicial Court said, yes, this is a valid constitutional law. However, we as a judicial part of government cannot order the legislative body to appropriate money. So there was a standoff. The law was never enacted, and eventually it was repealed by the legislature.
And I think part of this, too, Paul, is who's going to sue? You know, Diana DiZoglio, the state auditor, to have to go through the Attorney General's office, and Andrea Campbell has had big concerns about initiating that process that came out late last year.
And she's really been siding with House and Senate leadership.
Although, yeah, if there was a suit, though, the Attorney General would have to defend who's ever sued, right?
I think so, which is a whole nother mess in its own right.
It's a tangled mess.
Maybe there's an advocacy group that decides to try to sue. But all this means is it's going to get tied up in court, and the law is never going to be implemented.
Exactly the playbook that was followed with the campaign finance law.
But Adam, your earlier point about elections, right? Voters, 70% plus approved, said they wanted this. Do you think this is something that voters are going to dig in their heels and say, look, this is something we wanted and you didn't deliver, and we're going to see an impact on some legislative seats as a result? Or is this just going to burn out and voters are going to give up?
Well, I think you bring up a good point, Carrie, because, this is the kind, a lack of transparency or perceived lack of transparency is the kind of thing that could get somebody, voted out. But the problem is a lot of incumbents run unopposed in this state. There's just not that many contested races. Now, Diana DiZoglio, on the other hand, maybe she had her eyes for running at governor. She's probably not going to run against Governor Healy, who has indicated she's going to try to come back for another term. But somebody might try to swoop in and run against her as auditor, maybe somebody who's tight with legislative leaders on Beacon Hill. And, this could be a problem for her as much as it could be for legislators if it's not implemented.
Sten, any thoughts for you out there on the phone, or shall I move on to Scoops, Praise, and Prediction?
They pretty much cover it. The only thing I'll say is retaining an attorney to fight an audit doesn't scream transparency.
Not even a little. No.
All right. Well, here is the section I just mentioned, our prediction, scoop, and praise portion of the show, where we ask our group to make a prediction about the news, dish about a story they're working on, or maybe heap a little praise on a newsworthy nugget you read or saw or heard this week. Let's start. Oh, go ahead, Paul Tothill.
Oh, I was going to. You were looking at me, so I thought we were going to start with me.
Let's start with you.
I was just going to say, you mentioned this earlier about the delivery drivers working in the inclement weather. I'll sing out a praise to postal carriers. I had a nice conversation with my own postal carrier yesterday. We were discussing the situation at my condominium complex, where the mailboxes were completely surrounded by a sheet of ice that had to be about 4 inches thick. But somehow he managed to deliver the mail, and I think that all of the postal carriers out there and the other delivery people deserve praise for the work they've done in this past week.
And I want to praise the Department of Public Works people, the contractors, everybody who was out in this weather for days trying to clean up, still out there in many cases. I saw a backhoe going across my street. They work long, hard hours. The overtime pay may be nice, but they're away from their families. It's really time-consuming. It's taxing. It's a lot of hard work, and they've been having to go at this for a week trying to battle Mother Nature, which is an uphill battle.
Thanks, Adam Frenier. And Sten Spinella, how about for you? Scoop, praise, prediction, what's on your mind?
I've got a quick scoop. There's a civil trial in Pittsfield I'm covering stemming from this issue at the North Adams Airport the Eagle's been on for the past year. 3 family members are going against 2 friends in what is essentially a property dispute over an airplane hangar. And, they've harassed each other over the years. But what's newsworthy is that the answer could come out in this trial of how a hangar was vandalized at the North Adams Airport and led to a more than $750,000 renovation paid for by the city, state, and federal government.
Wow, certainly something that's important to keep an eye on there, Sten. Well, I'm going to make a quick prediction. I'm going to predict that MCLA leaders are going to see the need for much more transparency around this issue of this new proposed arts center. That does it for us this week on The Rundown. Thank you to Adam Frenier, Paul Tudhill, and Sten Spinella. I'm Carrie Saldo. You have been listening to The Rundown on 88.5 NEPM. Have a wonderful Friday, everybody.